It can be abstract, potentially confusing, almost to the point of creating pain in your brain if you have a burning desire to memorize dozens of lines of text, whether that's from a poem or from song lyrics or quotes that you really want to memorize, or, as many people have the goal, memorizing Scripture. And when it comes to Scripture, there are many, many lines, there's numbers that go with the lines, and a lot of nuanced details. There's a lot of repetition to deal with. And I sometimes forget what it's like to be a beginner with these techniques because I memorize long form verbatim a lot myself.
But you opened up memory palaces and boom, like it was like off to the races.
That's why I'm so glad that Matt Barclay reached out when he completed a major memory goal after going through not even the entire Magnetic Memory Method Masterclass. So I'm going to play a video of him getting up in front of an audience and reciting from memory the lion's share of a psalm. We're going to talk about what happened when he reached the end of the memory palace that he used for that psalm and went to reading from the book directly. But this is an astonishing and wonderful and fulfilling demonstration of memory techniques that I think is so much more interesting to talk about than, say, a name demonstration, which is what we often see from people. They're doing a demonstration of memorizing names, which is cool. It definitely shows how the techniques work. But demonstrations like Matt is sharing here is more in my wheelhouse. Like I went and did a TEDx talk to show this demonstration from memory and put in Sanskrit verses in that TEDx talk and some quotes to show you that this is about a lot more than names. It's about a lot more than lists. There's so much that you can do that will fulfill you personally and allow you to help others, which Matt talks about. But of course, Matt also was able to help himself because, as you'll learn, he was recovering from cardiac arrest and he has had some very interesting memory experiences around that as well. So I'm going to give you this demonstration in full that Matt shared with me. I hope you find it as interesting and inspiring as I do. And then here on the Magnetic Memory Method podcast, we're going to go into a discussion with Matt about his experiences recovering from cardiac arrest, what it did to his memory and his mind, how he got back on track, and then how he wound up being able to very quickly memorize all of these lines and then get up in front of a live audience and recite it. And we talk about the role of mistakes in a way that I just was very, very happy to be able to seize upon because I make mistakes too. And it's very, very empowering and encouraging for people who may be new to these techniques or hitting some kind of plateau with them and just need that encouragement and that insight from someone who's sharing the road on long-form verbatim memorization so that you can keep going and keep that journey magnetic. So without further ado, check out this amazing memory demonstration courtesy Matt Barclay and the conversation about it here on the Magnetic Memory Method podcast.
Good morning, Grace Life.
Good morning.
Psalm 86, a psalm of David. Incline your ear to me, O Lord, and answer me, for I am afflicted and needy. Preserve my soul, for I am a godly man. O you, my God, save your servant who trusts in you. Be gracious to me, O God, for to you I cry out all day long. Make glad the soul of your servant. O Lord, my God, I lift up my soul to you. O Lord, you are good and ready to forgive, abundant in loving kindness to all who call upon you. Give ear to my prayer. Give heed to the voice of my supplications. In my day of trouble, I shall call upon you, and you will answer me. There is no one like you among the gods, O Lord. No, nor works like yours. For the nations you have made shall come and worship before you, and shall come and glorify your name. For you, O Lord, are great and do wondrous deeds. You alone are God. Teach me your way, O Lord, and I will walk in your truth. Unite my heart to fear your name, and I will give you thanks with all my heart, and will glorify your name forever. For your loving kindness towards me is great, and you have delivered my soul from the depths of Sheol. O God, arrogant men have arisen against me, and a band of violent men have sought my life, but they have not set you before them. O Lord, you are a God, gracious and merciful, abundant in loving kindness and truth. Turn to me and be gracious to me. O grant your strength to your servant and save the son of your handmaid. Show me a sign for good, that those who hate me may see it and be ashamed. Because you, O Lord, have helped me and comforted me.
Matt, thanks for joining me on the Magnetic Memory Method podcast. And what an incredible story. Tell me a little bit about this wonderful professor who introduced you to Harry Lorraine, and then, the benefits and the limits of Lorraine and linking.
Oh, yeah, sure. So back in seminary, man, this is over a decade ago. Well, man, bordering on 2 now. I had a great professor, Dr. Barry Leventhal, and just in passing, as he was describing something else, he mentioned having a memory system. And he mentioned this book, The Memory Book by Lorraine and Lucas, and told us, you all should get this. It will really help. And so I picked it up. I was kind of, up until later in life, I was a bit of a slacker. And so I had a lot of ground to cover pretty fast over some of my peers who'd been more studious and disciplined. And having a memory system would help. And it sure did. I started with the book, and I got, his linking concept, which, there, of course, a lot of overlap with what I'm learning of magnetic memory, imagery, and stuff like that. But it's, his linking of the images would really help me in getting everything, memorized fairly quickly. And then I did the number system, which I didn't know until much later was called the major system. And I got overwhelmed though when it came to the pegs. Like I remember being on an airplane and looking at this list of 100 pegs, and just I could not connect with those at the time. And so unfortunately, I had already gotten through the hardest courses that I was going to have to do as far as memory. And so at that point, I just sort of leaned on what I already had, and I didn't take it any further. And that was the beginning of the memory process. And that some of those frustrations would come back a decade later, the second time I would pick up memory and training my mind.
Well, what is involved in seminary school? Like, what are some of the demands on your knowledge and exams? What are they like? Just a little bit more about what that program of study is like.
Sure. So mine was a Master of Divinity in Apologetics. That meant that I had, I think, 96 credit hours, which is going to end up being. I did the math once. I don't know, maybe tens of thousands of pages of reading. I don't know. It was a lot of reading, right? For every class. and you needed to have a certain level of mastery over it, and they'd be in different areas. So for my degree program, there was the pastoral area. This is things like, how to help your parishioners in an educational program, how to help them with those traumatic experiences in life, and models of biblical counseling, and where to point people to get them what they need in those areas. So you had those pastoral areas. You had the biblical areas. These are things like, what are the methods by which scholars are interpreting the text, and how do we evaluate those, and how do we get at the text as the text, and move from it, things like that. And then the apologetics area, which was sort of unique to the seminary I was at and the program I was in. Those are things like, we're making truth claims here. Do we have any philosophical or scientific evidence to sort of back that up? And so it was a whole lot of that, because that brings a lot of comfort when when you look at this and say, well, this is a reasonably held belief, and here's why. So it was those were the three big areas of study. For me, the memory component came in, biblical languages, which I didn't have the full one. I want to go back. That's one of my long-term goals in memory, is now to use that and really get rich in Koine Greek and Hebrew. And but I did have some language requirements. So in order to get those, the memory system was key, as well as all the facts and figures. How many Greek manuscripts do we have of the New Testament, and memorizing all the numbers, and where to find the verses. It's all kinds of stuff like that.
Well, it sounds amazing. And do you deal with like syllogisms and stuff like that in the Thomas Aquinas thing, like actual structured,
absolutely,
logical trees and diagrams and so forth?
Yeah. Aristotle and Aquinas were huge at our seminary, actually. So Aquinas' 5 ways, and Aristotle's metaphysics. So bunch of moderate realists coming out of that seminary.
And did you ever independently come across in some of Theologica, for example, what Aquinas is writing about memory, or is that?
So I have, but I haven't read it yet.
Okay.
So I've like referred to it, but I haven't done the deep study there. And
Right.
I've got in my Bible software, I've got his text, and I've got his commentary on Aristotle. All those things are on my list. But
Right.
the
There's so much to read,
heart
isn't
event
there?
kind of exactly the heart event sort of changed my timetables a bit. So
Well, talk about this event and what happened in your
sure.
life when something unexpected like that happens.
Yeah. So it's kind of a crazy story, because, if it had happened years before, I just would have been dead. But many years ago, I kind of made the decision to get healthy, mainly because I wanted to be able to play on playgrounds and do Ninja Warrior type stuff. You ever seen that American Ninja Warrior show? It's that kind of stuff. I at the time, I was obese and had never been in a gym and that kind of thing. So I got healthy, did that, started to compete in the leagues, and it was a total life change. And man, it was like being a kid in the playground again. It was fantastic and so much fun. One night during a Ninja Warrior, is a Ninja League competition, and I'm in the middle of my run, and I don't remember it here, but I can tell you, I remember it in my body. When I watch the video, I can feel the moves. So there's this really weird thing with that particular night, but whatever that is, I get about 2/3 of the way through the course, put my hands on my knees like I'm trying to catch my breath, stand up, and then just collapse onto the mats. And it would be about a quarter of an hour, 16 minutes before there was anything on my Apple Watch. So during that time, my friends were giving me CPR and praying over me, and waiting for the EMTs to arrive. It would be a couple days before I start to remember things again, though I was awake after 3 days. It was on a Friday it was a Friday to Sunday, and woke up Sunday. There wasn't a nurse in, and I guess I pulled out the breathing tube
Right.
apparatus on my own, and they got me back down. Oh, thankfully, I don't remember that part, and spent a couple weeks in the hospital. But that meant that I was recovering from an anoxic brain injury, and everything had sort of swollen and was coming back into focus. And yeah, so then I had a new set of challenges to work through, and that included memory. Initially, they were letting my wife know, look, you may not. Who comes back if he wakes up? He may not be like he was before. He may not be the same, and a lot of changes can take place there. So there was a lot of, she was just thankful I was awake, but my
Right.
personality was different every day for those first couple of days.
Oh, wow.
And I was in the hospital for 3 weeks, sort of getting back online, so to speak, and and then probably that first year after this occurred was a lot of mental retraining and mental growth and exploration. And man, that I made some very personal discoveries about memory in that time,
I
because
can imagine.
I was talking to the lead pastor here, and we're going back and forth, and I can't remember what we were talking about, but the answer to what we were talking about was, well, it's going to be in, I can't grab the word. It's the study of man. And he's like, anthropology. I was like, anthropology. And it was like, as soon as he said that, it was like, I don't know, a flood of the hours and the readings and, the parts of anthropology that I had worked on and studied in seminary. So it'd be like that as things would reconnect. One thing reconnects, and it would, sort of flood in a whole bunch of other things with it. So it's been kind of a neat window into however, this brain works for whatever that's worth.
Well, I mean, I think if we just use our observation and logic and arguments, I mean, if we can scan a brain and we can scan 1,000 brains and we can scan 1,000,000 brains and we see all these patterns, chances are that we can share those sorts of experiences. And if nothing else, when you say things like, you had different personalities, I think we all know what that means. Even if we don't know what it means for you, I mean, we can translate that into something very immediate, because we all have our own experience of our own personalities changing at some level, like from hope to desperation to fear to happiness and so forth. But what was that like? Do you have a memory of the personalities that you went through, or do you just have the description that you got from your wife?
So I have the description from my wife and friends, and who saw me, and my experience of it was, I can see the difference now looking back, but in the moment there was a lot of confusion. I didn't understand. I was like, well, why don't they? Why are they acting like I'm different? And part of what we sort of in piecing it together later is kind of, it was almost like going through the maturity process. And so one day was the smarmy teenager, and another day was sort of the, sort of the arrogant youth. And, it was sort of this progression of almost growing up back into myself,
Wow.
for my personalities. And, so, but yeah, like some of it I could tell. Now I remember there was a time at which I just had to, say, look, I know that I am still myself. And even if there are parts that didn't disconnect or didn't reconnect, there's still a continuity between who I am today and who I was. Even, I mean, a big experience is going to change anybody, but that doesn't mean there isn't still a continuity with who
Right.
was and who is.
Yeah, that's super interesting. There's some texts that talk about, ancient texts that talk about consciousness as a field. And in some sense, we are, whatever we think of ourselves as individuals or whatever, we are both the field and the observer of the field at the same time. So it's not like the field ever changes, and it's not like the witness of the field ever changes, but there's like always this little mouse riding this huge elephant across the field, and the mouse sometimes thinks that it's sort of in control of the elephant, but the elephant is just, navigating this field as the witness of the field. I guess that's a way to think about it, and I often think of that myself. But interesting, if you would go through like this almost Shakespearean stages of life on the stage of life, so to speak, and in some sort of historical order from teenager to the arrogant youth and so forth, as you put it. Anyway, thanks for sharing that. That must have been something very interesting to go through for sure. And how does that lead you to want to go back to mnemonics? Did memory techniques just pop into your mind at some point, and Lorraine came, or did you have a goal that you needed to accomplish?
I kept hearing from different authorities to temper my expectations. Whether that was you probably won't ever return to ninja. Well, then there are some experts who said, "Oh yeah, you're going to be fine. You're going to be back there. You're going to be doing that." And to temper my expectations on what my mind would be and what changes would be there. And I don't know. I learned through the body transformation that it was in there. It was in there. It just needed the discipline and the training and the right people to give the right guidance to sort of push me into going from obesity to ninja warrior, right? So that was in there. So it's like, well, right now, I don't have a disciplined brain. I'm not doing the things that people with disciplined brains do. And so what changes if I make those changes? What if, even if, let's say I've got a speed limit somewhere, let's say there's some limit. Well, perhaps, just because that limit's been lowered, if I'm training myself up to that limit, that may be further than I ever would have gotten if I, never had a cardiac arrest and then didn't focus my brain. So I think it was more about like, all right, let's see what we can do with what's here. And I want to say, like, I am very blessed in the results, of what did come back naturally, and what, and I do, and I know it's, people would say different things. I believe I received a miracle in that, to go that long without it, and to have as much memory and as much cognition and everything that I have. So I'll, but regardless of, what one would call it, I'm blessed by what I have, but I want to see where can I go. And so that led me back to mnemonics, and I was like, all right, well, let's start trying to retrain the brain. Let's go back through Lorraine. And so, I started to bring out the memory book and picked up Memory Mastery and started to work through those again. And this time when I got to the peg system, I was like, no, I'm not giving up. This time I'm going to have all 100 pegs memorized. And I got them memorized. Now, don't test me on it today, because I'll bet you some of my pegs would be different from his. But, I do continue to use pegs and the major system now. And it's super helpful to me. But I haven't gotten to your lecture yet on numbers. That's coming. I'm in the master class, but I haven't gotten to yours on
We're
numbers.
We're going to bulldozer it all.
Yeah.
I'm kidding.
But as as I'm going through this, like, I was like, okay, well, let's start to apply it. Let's get back that confidence that I'm missing, because what'll happen is someone will ask a question, and because I'm not confident that what I remember is right, I'm afraid to answer when I'm asked a question. Because, well, which king was that? Well, which book of the Bible is this in? Well, is it Ephesians or Philippians? And the sad thing is, most of the time, my answer would have been correct, but the confidence was gone. It's like, okay,
Right.
well, let's put everything in the system that I want stored, and then I can get some of that back, and so I can answer with confidence again, and increase that confidence, and be the best help I can be, and maybe even help inspire some of the people who had similar things happen. That hey, let's see where I can go if I'm tested. So that's when we
Right.
started up the Bible memory class, and which was really a way for me to get a group of people that would be into the same thing, and we could start doing it together.
Right.
And started to try to apply Lorraine's stuff to memorizing, and the goal was to work on the Psalms. Now, it was going okay, but what I found, and what was mirrored in some of those in the class, it was just a handful of us, was taking the links, which was take those links, and if you were to do a psalm, you build your imagery, and then you build one crazy image into the next image into the next image. But I was getting frustrated with the amount of time it was taking me to connect these images. It was one thing to build a crazy image here and a crazy image here, but then to build the chain was taking a frustrating amount of time for me. Now it just so happened, didn't just so happen, because I was researching for the class what else is out there. That's when I happened to find your YouTube video, which was a tribute to Lorraine. And so I found you from that video on Lorraine, and you were saying some of what you were saying in there was resonating with me, and some of the differences. And then you started to bring back memory palaces. Well, I had encountered the idea of that before in seminary, but it wasn't a part of the system. But then I bought your book on how to memorize the Psalms. And well, here we go. Let's, with a few weeks left in the class, let's see what this is. And I remember going, and it was like week 4 out of 6. And I said, guys, I'm sorry I didn't find this a few weeks ago, but wow. Because what I had done is I had turned the upstairs of our church building into my first, well, I say my first memory palace, but I think I built one as a kid without knowing it. That's a fun story in a Super Mario Brothers 2 world.
Right.
Anyway, so I built a memory palace out of the upstairs, including this room that I'm in right now, my study, and was able to memorize Psalm 6 in no time at all, because I had images already, but by putting those images in the locations that I just knew, because I know the building well enough, I was just able to walk it, using your principles. Don't cross your path, and, map out your path ahead of time. And it just sat in place. And it was like, I love those light bulb moments. And that was just such a great moment for me, because it took the brakes off. It took off the parking brake.
Right. Well, it's a beautiful demonstration that you shared with me. And I personally don't know how to do, I do a lot of long form memorization, and I don't know how to do it without having, those sort of principles in place, because otherwise, you end up leading yourself into dead ends, but also you have to create the memory palace as you go, which is just detracting from the actual encoding of the verse. So I'm glad that you put that into action, because, watching you do that is really interesting and fulfilling and profound, because I think that these texts have an oral tradition to them, and you can just experience it so differently. And, you have this wonderful way of just having the book in your hand, but you are the book, you are the word made flesh and I don't mean to say that in a way that might sound blasphemous, but
I read you.
It's like you're doing the actual thing instead of thinking about it, instead of preaching about it, and I mean that in the sense of, like telling people what to do and how to do it, that sort of thing. You're living it, you're breathing it, you've become the wisdom. That it's an astonishing example. I think perhaps more profound than watching Lorraine rattle off names, quite frankly. All due respect to our
of
dearly
course,
departed
yeah.
Lorraine.
What's so beautiful too is how the verses that I would memorize, and a situation would come up with a friend or with someone in the congregation, and hey, what do you know? That would be a part of something that brought hope. That would be a part of, and it was right there, able to be accessed, and it was there when I needed it for them, and it wasn't like, oh, it's somewhere in, I gotta,
Right.
I was just able to there and provide hope.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, that's so interesting. That image that you just gave of, oh, you need some consolation. Hold on, it's I think it's around page 453. No, sorry. You could see that being in some John Cleese Monty Python routine where it's just like the endless shuffling around for that one gem that's gonna provide relief in the moment. Yeah, I mean, I can see that having so much power at the individual level too, not just in front of the congregation.
Yeah.
And as you say, just knowledge too of how many, kings are involved in a particular area during a particular sweep of time, which has historical implications as well, and would probably lead to different kinds of questions that you would want to ask that you wouldn't have otherwise if you weren't absorbing some of those granular details.
Yeah. Like, because I'm using the same image every time, oh Lord, comes up in the Psalms, it's like I can quickly scan my palace and I can say, oh yeah, that happens in Psalm 86. That happens this many times, where it's, oh Lord. And then another interesting connection I wouldn't have made, both are Psalms of David, Psalm 86 and Psalm 6, but in both there's a pairing of prayer and supplications, and and he pairs them very similarly in the two. And because of my images in my head in the two palaces, I'm able to say, oh, wait a minute, there's a connection here that I wouldn't have made without having put them in my palaces.
Right. Yeah, these sort of I sometimes think of them as wormholing, where your mind just starts to connect as if it's leaping through a wormhole from one place to the other. Mm-hmm. So maybe take us a little bit into like the shop. When you talk about, oh Lord, what are you doing? I mean, how do you even just begin? What's the first image on the first station when you got started in terms of the psalm that you demonstrated?
So the psalm that I demonstrated, incline your ear, O Lord, and answer me. Now, I built that one. That one's in my house. And so the first thing, was to find the terminal point in my house where I could, get the most out of the real estate. And, what I did for incline was I picked someone whose last name is Klein. And
I was just thinking Patsy Cline myself.
Yeah, and I cartooned him, right? So, and that's the other thing. So this one, something I saw both in the Bible memory class and in my own experience, because this is just sort of an observation. So forgive the tangent here, but I grew up watching cartoons. One of those was Muppet Babies. Now in Muppet Babies, all the characters would go on these imaginative adventures, and anytime they imagined, there would be like the little wavy thing, and then they were just in their imagination. So for most of my childhood, teenage years, I kind of assumed that my imagination was broken, because I couldn't have the same vivid imagery that the Muppet Babies were able to produce in the cartoon. And, so I, for a while, I kind of gave up on trying to picture things very well. Well, in the work, both times with memory work, I've come to the idea for myself, everything is cartoony. and specifically it's that 80s He-Man
Mhm.
animation style
Right.
that showed up, and so everything is those, because of the colors and the clear lines, and so every image is a cartoon, and it sits in the real world, in the real locations for me. So I don't know if that's helpful to anyone but me, but it's really been helpful for me. Somebody in the Bible memory class, most of his things are Seinfeld. so he's got this like encyclopedic knowledge of Seinfeld, and so most of his imagery is Seinfeld related. But in any case, so incline your ear to me, O Lord. So incline was literally the O Lord image, uh, opening up and putting an ear in his mouth, and this is where, and we talked about this, and you can imagine, as in Christians, we want to always be reverent and respectful of God and the Lord, and so I had to talk to him about like images, and so my "O Lord" and is uh, the image that I have, when I want to imagine Lord, uh, it's the Burger King, from the commercials, and the
Oh yeah,
important
yeah.
thing being the crown.
Right,
Okay,
right.
so Lord, whenever it's Lord, so I have that crown in there. The crown is the important part of the image, but when I need to make it an "Oh Lord," there's a donut,
Mm.
so that I know that there's "Oh" there. Now, um, you know, any brothers and sisters watch this right now, they're like, now wait a minute, what does that do to your reverence of God? What I can tell you for myself is that it's like a springboard that takes me to the real. There is no chance in my mind that whatever image I put there on that shelf is going to ever be confused, or there's not a if you do it, you'll see that there's just not an issue there. Like I can use the Burger King imagery, but when I declare the psalm, when I speak it and meditate on it and pray it, I'm still praying to Lord. There's
Right,
not
right.
a, but yeah. So I've
Mm.
got the Burger King there with a donut head, and I can see that donut head and how many times he shows up.
Mm.
And that, when I come back to the Psalms, part of what I'm going to do, I'll use my Bible software to make a word list, because there's a lot of the common words. So, being able to know what common words and phrases I'm going to come up with ahead of time, and see what imagery. So it's kind of a spin on your magnetic lists, but because I know the subject material is all going to be the Psalms, I can build lists to those
Right,
things I'm
right,
going to
right.
need. So Eeyore for your,
Oh yeah, I use Eeyore quite
so
a bit
he
actually.
was Eeyore.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
well, do you think you have an advantage having studied apologetics? And the reason why I ask this is because, a lot of people do think that they're going to be involved in sacrilege. They're going to have issues with blasphemy, etc. Or it just take a different belief system. There's certain belief systems where you're not allowed to represent the Godhead figure in that system. And I always find that a bit logically problematic because, well, hang on, you're telling me about Allah, right? And Bismillah, Rahmanir, like I can memorize a little bit of the Quran, no problem, right? But the thing is that even Bismillah, has Allah in it, which is itself a reference to the thing that we're not supposed to reference. So, and it's very hard for me to square that logically. And so
Yeah.
I wonder if your ability to just sort of measure that out and say, well, hey, these are representations, they're appearing here, whether they're created or not created or whatever, like however we're gonna like do this, there's something ineffable about what's going on. There's something beyond our little representation systems. So, is that part of how you're comfortable with it that maybe other
Yeah.
people would
And
more
so,
struggle with?
so one friend in the class messaged me this week about the very thing, because there is the within the Ten Commandments, no graven images,
Mm.
and so and I gave and I'm, I am. Um, there are certain things. It's like, G.K. Chesterton. The open mind is to close around. Paraphrasing here, to close around the truth. So there's some things that it's like, okay, some things I'm settled in, but other things, if I have a bad interpretation, and at some point, I'm open to the correction on it.
Mm.
But the way I'm, understanding it is, that, that's really, it's about making an idol, because you had, others carving wooden idols and then worshiping the idol as if it was the God. And what God is referring to is, don't do that. I cannot be contained in wood or in stone, and so, which is, I think, in a different category. There comes the apologetics, right? And
Right.
it's in a different category than an artistic expression or a mnemonic.
Mm.
So I don't think people can accidentally make idols.
Right.
Would be my position there.
Right.
So I'm sure that might light up your comments with with counter arguments, and I'm always happy to hear them. But that's where I stand right now.
I get in hot water sometimes because I talk about Giordano Bruno a fair amount, and he had issues with the church, and so badly that they burned him at the stake. So
Right.
there's obviously a fine line that some people see on these kinds of issues, and one of Bruno's problems is that he knew Aristotle inside and out, and Aristotle says the stars are fixed, so the Catholic Church are like, the stars are fixed, and Bruno is just like, yeah, but Aristotle's the guy who, in his own metaphysics, talked about the law of non-contradiction, the law of the excluded middle, the law of identity, and all that sort of stuff. And before that, he gets into all that jazz, he says there's a big problem with all of this because it's all self-referential, and let's just sweep that problem under the rug. And then all of civilization from then on is beholden to Aristotle. Like, it makes no sense, right? So, he got into hot water for that. And then, I mean, studying apologetics is the people willing to get into hot water to like analyze these sorts of things. Is it really logical? And as you say, this category is this category that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the imagination. So that's good thinking.
Thanks. Yeah. And if it's not, at some point I'll be corrected, and, I'll move on from there, but it seems to make sense. It seems to hold.
Well, I think it's like a lot of people consume a lot of memory training material, and there are some books that I've talked about on the Magnetic Memory Method podcast long ago. One in particular, I'm going to actually take a risk here. I think it was Adam Hogue or something like that. And he basically says in there, you should just use rote, because rote for biblical memorization, it keeps you safe, or what have you, this kind of thing. And just by prayer alone, you could reach verbatim memorization of the text. And again, I find that very, very problematic, because if we go back to the Hebrew traditions, I mean, one of the this is a mythical story, I don't even know if it's true or not, but one of the rabbis was approached by a student, and the student says, I'm having a hard time memorizing all this text the way all you other rabbis do it. And the rabbi says, son, you must become a serious student of the alphabet. And we'll maybe recall that, the alphabet starts with alpha and it ends with omega. So it's just like, how much more connected to pure immanence could you ever be than exactly that advice, being a student of the alphabet and all that it can do for your imagination and your mind to avoid rote learning and rote repetition. So
there is a psalm, and this is where there goes that confidence, right? Is this something that I've disconnected because of the my anoxic brain injury, or just a bad memory? I think it's Psalm 118. And in the Hebrew, every section begins, so it's Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, and it goes through the Hebrew alphabet, and each one begins with the letter. So, there you go. There's the alphabet right in a psalm. That's one. If I was trying to memorize all 150 psalms, that's the one that I would probably save till last.
Right. Well, that sounds like an interesting one to take on sooner or later. But
yeah,
what would you say to anybody who has similar experiences like you had, where you had to have, a period of recovery, or just anybody who's struggling with this stuff and wants to get started, what consolation can you give them? What tip or strategy that's going to make a big difference so that they can just get rolling and be able to do something like you've accomplished?
Yeah. So, if you're recovering from something, don't think about where you were. Don't take it as a don't get caught up in comparison. Oh man, before this I could have. Well, you are here today. So let's work with where you are and see where you go. I mean, it may be that where you go is worlds farther than where you were before. It may be that it's not, but either way, the journey of pushing yourself is going to bring you a sense of joy and fulfillment. There's something, and I believe that there's something about achieving what we can achieve as humans that taps into what it means to be human, and what it means to be created by God and reflecting His, being an image bearer of God. And so yeah, go ahead and explore it, do it, see what happens. There's going to be a fulfillment even in that, and relax during the process. That and this is where I try to take my own advice here. I go into the gym now and I can't do what I could do before. I can't lift the weights I could lift before, and it'll take a while before I can. So just enjoy having fewer plates on while you're building up, because there's once you're further down, you'll be thankful that you did versus just walking away. So there's some of it there, and then believe that it can happen too. There's I don't know if you'd ever read Laney Basham with Winning in Mind. He's an Olympic gold medalist, and the whole book is about the mindset of winning athletes. And there's a lot of great insights in there about just how to set yourself up for success by, number one, believing that you're there, and just know that you're going to be there. And so everything you're doing is just the steps it's going to take to get there, but it's there, mm-hmm. And so you wake up sort of affirming those things, so you won't hear me say, for all the stuff, I try not to say, yeah, I have a bad memory. And that's in your work as well, I think, where you say, don't talk like that,
Yeah. Doesn't do any good.
So, right.
Well, that's great. And great reading tip. I'll have to check that out. One thing before we conclude that I have to ask, not only because I have a feeling that I'll be asked why I didn't ask you if I don't ask, but also I'm curious myself. You mentioned Super Mario game memory palace. So maybe talk a little bit about that, because the thing that came to my mind is that it is de facto a kind of memory palace. And especially when you think of, I don't know if you've ever seen these speedrun competitors.
Oh yeah.
Where they're just trying to shave off seconds of time. And the analysis of the speedrun, which there's lots of analyses of these speedrunners on YouTube to watch, they really come down to memorizing these locations so extraordinarily well, so they get their hand motor coordination to literally shave off seconds of time. And then other hacks appear, which I think is very illustrative of what happens when you just take action and you study and you implement and so forth. Is these different things appear to you that you wouldn't see otherwise. So that makes me very, very curious about what you mentioned in terms of a video game as a memory palace.
Yeah. So, and this is just, as I was reading, it would have either been How to Memorize the Psalms or Victorious Life.
Victorious Mind.
Victorious Mind, yeah. So as I was reading one of those, it occurred to me, wait a minute, I think I've done this. I was, loved video games back as a kid. And so, I would get home and just play for hours. And Super Mario Brothers 2, there was this one level where these things are flying at you and it's icy and you've got to navigate your character through this thing. And it was very much a choreography, very much a dance to, to do it quickly, to do it well, and to do it perfectly. And so I had sort of, in my mind, perfected my path through this level to the point where it was just sort of ingrained in me. And at a similar, at the same time, I was in some after school program that was like, had all the kids doing a dance routine, and there were like what felt like 1 million dance moves to memorize for these 3 songs, worth of a dance. And without knowing what I was doing, I was taking the dance moves, the choreography, and I was attaching the choreography to the pieces of the level. And so I was, following the level with the choreography. And so somehow that helped me to ground the choreography and just sort of, have it as a kid. So I must have been, I don't know, whenever Mario 2 came out, I was probably, I don't know, 3rd grade, thereabouts.
Right.
And had attached this choreography to this level of Mario 2. Someone will know what world it was. They'll know when I say the ice and the little pitchfork guys coming at you. Someone will tell me what level that was.
Yeah, well, that's amazing. That's amazing. And I think we do that as kids a lot more than we remember as adults. That sort of computational putting things together, like mental Lego in a way. So thank you for that. One last thing that just came up. I got to squeeze this in, and I don't know the best way to talk about it, but I think it's a thing that we always got to talk about. So I've watched you on this video spend what must be 10, 12 minutes reciting scripture from memory. And then here when we're talking, I don't expect anybody to memorize the title of any of my books, but you're like The Victorious Life and so forth. And I'm not pointing this a finger at anybody, because I do it too. I was on a podcast myself one time not that long ago. It hasn't even been released yet, so you can't fact check my own memory of my own mistake, because I don't remember exactly what mistake I made. But I was talking about Hugh of St. Victor, but I used an image of Hugo, my friend, for Hugh of St. Victor. And so I said Hugo, and then I was like tripping over myself. And then I was like, whatever that guy's called. Something like this, right? I saw Tony Buzan, the same thing. He's like at a thing, and he's talking about me or whatever, and he had just read a thing that I did, and he said to me in front of everybody in this group, and he's like, and whatever your PhD is in,
right,
this sort of thing, because he clearly didn't remember in that moment. So the reason why I'm seizing upon it is, and since we've talked about logic, we've talked about contradictions and so forth, how does the world, because I know people are super sensitive to making mistakes, and I'm not. I mean, I don't like to make mistakes, and I'll sometimes punish myself for hours. I was once on a podcast. They asked me to memorize a deck of cards, and I missed one card, and for 4 days, I'm just like, how is that possible? I get 99% on the exam, and I'm worried about the one mistake. But people out there, they'll seize upon that. They'll be like, how does that make sense? The guy's memorizing scripture, reciting it flawlessly from memory for 10, 12, 15 minutes, however long it is. And then, there's this contradiction, there's this blip. So how do you think about that? Surely you must have made mistakes in your adventure so far. And, how do you deal with it?
I mean, if even in the video there, you'll see it's not a word for word. I'm still didn't have the word for word, and I didn't finish it from memory. Like I turned to the Bible for the last verses because I didn't have time to build those stations.
Right.
But even stuff like that, there a couple things. Number one is you get into this, and I'm early in my journey too, but it's not like you start this and therefore you're never going to forget something, or you're never going to, it's like, well, I think Lorraine, it was Lorraine who said that it's not that you it's not you forgot, you never remembered, you never memorized it in the first place. Right. So like take your book title, for example, I bought it on Kindle and I tapped into it, and I don't think I've seen the cover more than one time, because once I tapped in, I just kept reading it. So I didn't have Victorious in it, but it wasn't something that I had actually made an effort to store anywhere. So that's the first thing. Now there's another helpful tidbit, if you'll allow it, from that again comes from that Laney Basson book, and I'll butcher the details, but he's got a story in there about, it might have been his or it might have been somebody else who was an Olympic gold medalist shooter and shot all tens throughout the whole competition. You know, the rifle, you know, skiing thing. My only sport is ninja. I don't know. Sorry. But, you know, and he gets all tens, but he gets 2 9s. Right. And so at the end of it, you know, a student or a reporter is asking him, hey, what happened on those 2 9s? And he goes, those 2 9s? What? I couldn't tell you what happened about those 2 9s. I don't care about those 2 9s. What you should be asking me is, how did I get all those 10s? Right. And so it's that mind shift, that mindset shift that takes you to say, look, if you're going to dwell on your mistakes are going to get bigger than they actually are. Instead, say, all right, I acknowledge that. I put it aside because, you know what, as you know, this is in the book, it's not like me to do that because I'm on the way here. So I'm building habits that are going to take me somewhere else to where I've got a clearer mind. I'm not going to drop words. I'm not going to, you know, and when I do, meh, you know. And so, and then the last part is just, you know, letting feedback come from the correct sources. You know, the ability, what feedback people can give me depends on what they have either through authority, station, or time have earned. And so other feedback gets held and laid aside. You know, so it's not going to faze me.
Right. I think that's amazing, beautiful advice, and I appreciate it. I think it's really important, especially in our topic, because we are talking about memory, and it reminds me too of in this particular kind of memory project, which is oral in nature. There's lots of reasons to believe that the transmission of these texts, maybe not the Psalms in particular, but you know, just verbatim texts overall, that oral transmission was maybe never memorized verbatim in the first place. So, like if we take it to Homer and the epics, there's lots of evidence that the oral transmission was made out of productive constraints. So they would remember fewer things and then produce the story out of the epithets and that sort of material much more than actually a verbatim recitation. So it's almost like producing jazz out of knowing a 257 or 251 or whatever sort of chord progression, and then riffing out of that. So I think it's really important to be able to just roll with it and do what you can do, and you know, then just own whatever comes out of it. But as you say, I'm not carried about the 9s. Look at all the 10s, which I think is a beautiful mental model to follow. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay,
my
so
big goal is to get. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. I can edit this so it flows.
Oh yeah. So I have my big scripture memory goal that I'm building towards is when God answers Job out of the whirlwind, and it's very long, so it's you know, I'm building up to where I'll be able to recite that, and you know, that's something I would love to have in memory. So we'll see.
It's just a memory palace away, or maybe 2 or 3, depending on how big it is.
That's right. That's right.
Well, Matt, thank you so much for this. This was very enlightening and instructional in many ways for people who are into these kinds of projects, and hopefully encouraging for those who aren't into them to get into them. So thank you again. Is there anything we can share where people can find your work that you're doing, or anything that your church, that if they're in your area?
Yeah. If someone's in Charlotte or Pineville, you can come check us out at Grace Life Church of Pineville. You know, but I don't really have a online presence, so to speak. It's just, you know, just the local church.
Well, you never know who might find something they didn't know they were looking for. So thanks for mentioning that. And thank you again for sharing, you know, your experiences with this. And let's follow up if you have time and willingness to do so with the Job project, because that would be interesting to dive deeper into. But the insights you've shared today are amazing, and a cornucopia for people who would love to do this themselves.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me on, and thanks for getting it all in the master class and in your books. It's very helpful. So thank you for that.
Well, I want to thank Matt again for sharing his extraordinary experience, his wonderful demonstration. I learned a lot from just talking with him about it, and got lots of inspiration and learning from watching that demonstration, how wonderfully cool and collected he was in just delivering that. And wow, it's amazing to me how we can be at one with the text that we memorize. So I'm very, very grateful for that. And after we fell into this interesting conversation about philosophy and different angles on ontology and a little bit of epistemology, and it reminded me of some requests that I've had from people over the years to do something that was more philosophy focused. So if you'd be interested in something like that, please let me know. Some sort of discussion group. I don't know exactly how discussion groups would go, because sometimes people show up and they haven't actually read the philosophical text that one has in mind, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but nonetheless, I would think a wonderful discussion group around specific philosophical texts would be wonderful. But, my real joy is talking about the memory techniques and so forth, and then having an angle on how to memorize what it is that we read in philosophy. And I think one of the best things that you can do is memorize lines from philosophy so that you're able to connect magnetically a lot of the points that are around the lines. Because when you take really key lines from a text, it's going to help you naturally connect, without too much other memory techniques, some of the other key details. So, even just simple things that I've memorized, like everything possible has an urge to exist, or that's from Leibniz, or Nietzsche's line about friendship, how you can never adorn yourself for your friend enough, and you have to be like an arrow and a longing for your friend. And you can do that in German as well. Du kannst dich für deinen Freund nicht schön genug putzen, and on and on and on. Just memorizing that line helps connect so many of the other ideas around friendship in that philosophical text, which in this case is Also sprach Zarathustra. And it's just really, really empowering. So if you'd be interested in something like that, let me know. And if you have taken the Magnetic Memory Method Masterclass and had results, I would hope you would take Matt's example and join me in sharing what's taken place for you. And I just absolutely love every opportunity to encourage others, give more insight to others who are taking these techniques into action and getting results with them, so that we can share with others. That is the highest level, taking the techniques and sharing them with others, teaching others, so that you can actually process it for yourself, and you'll discover more angles about the techniques for yourself when you take it to that level. So I would love for us all to get together, do more sharing. And I know some people are shy, or they're not necessarily keen to be on the internet and so forth, but I really, really appreciate when there's an opportunity to give this more life from lived experiences that people like Matt, and maybe you, if you're listening, have had, to get this out there. Rose Swed was on the podcast recently talking about how she turned the body into a memory palace to help her with phlebotomy in nursing. So it doesn't have to be about verbatim text. It can be about all kinds of things. And again, I just think that this is the time. Now is the time to make the mnemonics renaissance grow and grow and grow even more, so that more people really understand that this is possible for them to absolutely crush it, to achieve their goals as the architect of their own futures. And only you can do it. And so if you can help in inspiring others, I would love to hear from you to make more episodes like these. Thanks again to Matt for this episode. Thanks to you for listening. And if you would like to hear more about memorizing verbatim, Mike McKinley was on the podcast, and you might want to look up that episode next, because he memorized 66 Psalms, and he shares some insights from his journey. And, I want to temper my ego here and not sound too proud, but I think we get at some things that probably only come out when I'm the one asking the questions here on the Magnetic Memory Method podcast. So thanks again to Matt. Thanks to you. Thanks to everybody who's been on the show to share the journey. And until we have a chance to speak again, keep yourself magnetic.